Hello, and welcome back to the Mathematicians podcast, the show where we follow the fascinating stories behind the people that count in the history of mathematics. I'm your host, Benjamin Cornish, and today we're climbing aboard a boat and crossing the river of history to meet a man full of questions. Alcuin of York was a clergyman, poet, and teacher. He also potentially takes the title of the first queer mathematician, at least in the post-pagan world, where that really meant something. He was born in 735 CE and retired just before the crowning of Charlemagne in 800. This makes him the last mathematician of the series, which, over the last 50 episodes, has focused on mathematicians of the Hellenic Greek tradition, from the start of recorded history up to the start of the Carolingian Renaissance and the Islamic Golden Age. Before I started my career as a crystal shopkeeper, I used to drive an ice cream van. This presented many challenges and problems relating to logistics, route planning, ice cream design, and most prominently, miscellany. One day, I had an issue with the onboard refrigeration unit and could not sell any ice creams. It was a hot day, and the people of Wimborne Minster were in desperate need of a generic chalk ice on a stick, so I was determined to solve this problem. The trouble was, my storage capacity in my little van was limited. I had space for the ice cream storage fridge and the refrigeration unit that powered it, or the refrigeration unit plus the generator needed to run the unit. Or I could of course had the generator plus the storage fridge. But if I just took the fridge and the unit, it would have had no power and the ice creams would melt. And if I had just taken the fridge and the generator, there would be no means to cool the fridge and the ice creams would melt. The only logical solution was to put the fridge in the van with the refrigeration unit, power it from my home, half full of water. Then, when the water froze solid, I could remove the refrigeration unit and disconnect the power, then fill the remaining cold storage with generic chalk ices on a stick. That would then last me the day without fully defrosting. This left me with enough space in my van to bring my new apprentice ice cream maker, whom I hoped one day to pass the business on to. I've noticed that since the last episode that I may have made a subtle mistake when I say that Charlemagne was crowned in 800 CE on Christmas Day, no less. This was only when he was crowned Emperor of the Carolingian Empire, a precursor to the Holy Roman Empire. Before 800 CE, Charlemagne was still King of the Franks and later King of the Lombards, and it was during this time that Alcuin was at his court. It is fitting then to discuss Alcuin as the last mathematician before the Carolingian Renaissance, as he was the teacher to many of its first scholars, and one of the architects of what would go on to shape learning in the medieval European world. Alcuin was born in York, a major county of Northumbria/England/ the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. See last week's episode for disambiguation. At York Cathedral, he studied under the Archbishop Ecgbert, who was a disciple of Bede from last week. We believe he was of noble stock, whatever that means, but we have little concrete evidence of his family or background. We do know that in 781 he was sent to Rome to ask the Pope for an official confirmation of York as an archbishopric, that being the home of an archbishop. Then, on the way home, he met Charlemagne and was co-opted into his court, somewhat reluctantly. Alcuin became master of the palace school of Charlemagne in Aachen, right on the border between modern-day Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands. This was primarily a finishing school for nobles, but Alcuin taught the liberal arts. Now, this is not the loose-knit band of subjects we see today of English literature, psychology, dance, and the like. In classical antiquity, it was the trivium of rhetoric, grammar, and logic, and the quadrivium of astronomy, arithmetic, geometry, and music, the last four being friends of the podcast for some time now. He was fairly influential with Charlemagne's court. In one intervention, he objected to the king forcing Christian baptism on pain of death, where he is quoted to have said, "Faith is an act of free will, not a forced act. We must appeal to the conscience, not compel it by violence. You can force people to be baptized, but you cannot force them to believe. He tried to go into retirement in England, but the franchise was commissioned for a sequel, Alcuin versus the Adoptionists. So this was a heretical Christian theological position coming from the Iberian Peninsula that advocated for Jesus as merely God's adopted son rather than his biological father. Actually, while researching this, I realised that this is a new theological position for me. I've never heard of this before, but the implication that Jesus was not adopted sort of implies that God was involved in a literal, physical and potentially messy biological way. Poor Mary. I've not yet been cancelled by strict adherence to the Catholic faith, but I think the statement, poor Mary, might seal the deal on that one. But hey-ho, with these things it's best to start early, especially as we're doing India and the Islamic Golden Age in subsequent series. He later did retire in his 60s and died in 804, aged 69. Outside of mathematics, he wrote a significant number of liturgical works. These are sermons to be read out in church, as well as quite a few commentaries on the Bible, although these were less original style and more with the intention of preserving past knowledge. His contributions to literacy are perhaps his biggest impact. He was particularly a calligraphist and turned his abbey school into a leading light of Carolingian miniscule. This is not a font he invented, but definitely one he popularised. The miniscule, as opposed to majuscule or capital, are the small letters we write when we are not sending tweets as the President of the US of A. For the typeface nerds out there, we can trace the modern Times font from Roman cursive and Unicule to Carolingian, Proto-Gothic, Humanist, and then Times. And yes, for all the typeface nerds out there, I did just refer to these as fonts. Come at me. Perhaps, more impressively, he is the first known user of the... He is the first known user of the question mark, which makes up half of my favourite Unicode character, the interrobang. Is it not yours? Although I should note that Alcuin's question mark looked more like a dot and a tilde, and he called it the punctus interrogativus. When reading the script, it looks almost like musical notation, where the words bounce around as normal and then at the end go up to a higher pitch with an upward stroke, a high rising terminal for my listener with a PhD in linguistics. Hi, James. This is just my impression from reading the text, but it does give further evidence to my own pet theory that medieval English accents were more like modern-day Australians. However, undoubtedly, the reason that he is in our sights today is his contribution to mathematics. He is, as far as I can tell, the first person to write a collection of material in the genre of recreational maths. This is different from a textbook, as it is not necessarily aimed to teach any particular theorem, method, or curriculum. It's just maths for the fun of maths, something I regularly engage in myself. His work, Proposiciones ad Acuendos Juvenes, which translates as Problems to Sharpen the Young, contains about 56 problems that are of either a mathematical or logical nature. Translated by John Hadley and David Singmaster, who I mention just because in my line of work I seem to frequently bump into something David Singmaster has done. You may know him as the guy who made Rubik's Cubes famous. There's a whole range of problem types in the work, including the earliest known variant of a particular puzzle type. And many of them are so fun that I think I'll just spend the next few minutes reading some of them out. The titular problem falls into the category of river crossing problems. So here's how it goes. A farmer with a wolf, a goat, and a cabbage must cross a river by boat. The boat can carry only the farmer and a single item. If left unattended together, the wolf would eat the goat, or the goat would eat the cabbage. The farmer must help them all cross the river without anything being eaten. So to solve this, he's going to do the following thing. He's going to take over the goat, come back empty-handed, then take the wolf, return with the goat, take the cabbage, return empty-handed, and then take the goat over. This is one of Lewis Carroll's favourite riddles, and it appears in lots of many other books of recreational maths. It even made it onto an episode of Star Trek Prodigy. Another problem, number 17, is called the jealous husband problem, but also appears in other sources as the missionaries and cannibals problem. There were 3 brothers who each had a sister, and they had to cross a river, for each of them had a lust for his neighbour's sister. And when they came to the river, they found nothing but a small boat in which only 2 of them could cross. Let anyone tell me how they crossed the river without even one of them being stained. This is the classic way that Alcuin likes to finish his riddles of let anyone who can tell me, I beg thee. It's very theatrical, but really he's just asking how do the 3 brothers get across the river so that none of the women that they all want to, let's be honest with, have lust for, end up getting stained or indeed worse by the brothers. Another, number 19, involves weight. So here Alcuin writes it as a man and a woman, each of whom had the weight of a loaded cart, had 2 children, each weighing the weight of the cart, and had to cross a river. They found a ship that could carry not more than 1 weight of the cart. Although I feel the solution to this is a little unmathematical, for he does give his own solutions to the problems as well. So I'll read you the solution he gives. First, 2 children would enter and cross over. One of them would bring the boat back. Then the mother, having entered the boat, would cross over. Then her son would bring the boat back. When she had crossed over, her brother would enter the boat, and both would cross over, and again, one of them would bring the boat back to the father. When she had returned, her son standing outside, the father would cross over, and again the son, who had crossed over before, would enter the boat and bring it back to his brother, and now, having returned, they would both enter and cross over. With such skill in rowing, the voyage would perhaps be completed without shipwreck. So here in his solution, certainly by my reading of the solution and the question, it seems as though the wording is a little unclear at first. I think that this means that there are 6 people in total, so a man with 2 children and a woman with 2 children, and the 2 children collectively weigh the same as a cart and can enter the boat. It does feel a little bit unclear, but then Alcuin is not known for his clarity in this particular book. Another side of problem was the barrel problem, and it goes a bit like this. And by the way, I'm trying to use the original Latin here, translated by Google Translate. Please do write in to correct my Latin translation. A certain father of a family, dying, left an inheritance to his 3 sons, 30 glass bottles, 10 of which were full of oil, another 10 were half full, and the third 10 were empty. Let him who is able divide the oil and the bottles, so that each of his 3 sons may receive equally both the glass and the oil. So interestingly, problems of this type have a number of different solutions that can fit the above puzzle. And in fact, they make up a sequence. For the OEIS fans out there, this is sequence A005044. And the coefficients of the expansion of the expression x cubed divided by 1 take x squared, 1 take x cubed, 1 take x to the 4, the expansion of that gives you the sequence. So that is where an is the nth term, and that's the nth coefficient of the expansion in increasing powers of x, such that 3 brothers can share n full, n half, and n empty bottles in an different ways. He also gives a variant of the Jeep problem. A certain head of household ordered that 90 baskets of grain be taken from one of his houses to another 30 leagues away. Given that this load of grain must be carried by a camel in 3 trips, and that the camel eats 1 basket per league, how many baskets were left over at the end of the journey? The more usual Jeep problem talks about how far a Jeep can explore the desert with maybe X litres of fuel. So imagine a man has 1,000 litres of fuel and a Jeep that can hold 50 litres per journey of 100 kilometres, but it can also stop at any point and drop spare fuel into a depot or collect fuel from a depot. As long as it never has more than 100 litres of fuel or less than 0, how far could the Jeep get into the desert? If you have an answer to that, please do comment on this episode. Quickly if you can, because as I write this, I'm about halfway into the Sahara on a research trip. We also have a first instance of a packing problem, which is a classic of the genre for recreational maths. There is a quadrangular city, which has one side of 1,100 feet, another side of 1,000 feet, a front of 600 feet, and a final side of 600 feet. I want to put some houses there so that each house is 40 feet long and 30 feet wide. Let him say, he who wishes, how many houses ought the city to contain? He states a similar problem with a triangular city and a circular city. For anyone interested in exploring packing problems in more depth, I would highly recommend researching the smallest square that contains n unit squares. And for those of you who prefer to do your mathematical research through song, may I direct you to the Pseudo-Random Ensemble, who have elected not to sponsor this episode, so I shall not tell you about their fabulous song, The Tumble Down Squares. There are a few puzzles involving different goods that cost different amounts, yielding different totals, where you have to work out the number of each good purchased. It's a classic 3-variable, 2-equation system of equations, although given that an integer solution is required for each, these become very similar to the Diophantine solutions that we met in episode 39, Diophantus. These are not new or particularly interesting, especially as the solutions are not given with any explanation as to how the solution was obtained, and yet he gives 7 of these. We then get an overtaking problem involving a dog and a hare. Again, not new or terribly interesting, although it does demonstrate an understanding of speed, more or less, something which is not yet formally defined at this point in history. Problem 42 is interesting. See if you can figure out why. There is a staircase that has 100 steps. 1 pigeon sat on the first step, 2 pigeons on the second, 3 on the third, 4 on the fourth, 5 on the fifth, and so on up to the 100th step. How many pigeons were there in all? You might notice that this is just a sum of natural numbers from 1 to 100. To solve this, he pairs 1 with 99, 2 with 98, and so forth, stating that there are 49 times 100 pigeons, plus the 50 on step 50, which was not paired, and the 100 on the 100th. This is a very similar strategy, although slightly more cumbersome than the one made famous by 7-year-old Carl Friedrich Gauss about 1,000 years later. Alcuin then shows his ability to troll the reader with a few silly questions, although for some reason these are numbered 14 and 43 rather than being left to the end of the text. Clearly he did not hire an editor for this work. Number 14 asks about the footprints left by an oxen in the furrow as it ploughs a field. The answer here is none, because the plough has destroyed the footprints. Badum tish. And number 43 asks about a farmer who has 300 pigs to be slaughtered on 3 days, with an odd number slaughtered per day. And the answer to this is, it's impossible. As a modern school teacher, I would avoid a question that is so graphic, avoid a question involving pigs for the sensitivities of some of my students, but most unforgivably, never ask a question that cannot be answered. Can the farmer pick 300 pumpkins with an odd number of each day? Might have been more appropriate. Not all of the questions are strictly numerical, like the cutting of cloth into smaller cloths, or give rise to sequences like the boat or jeep problems. Some of them are just logical conundrums. Conundra? I'm not sure about that. I'll have to check the online fora for pluralization later. Consider this one, number 11. If 2 men should marry one another's sister, tell me, I ask, what will be the son's relation to each other? Short, sweet, to the point, with a characteristically unsatisfying solution that they will be the same relation to each other. As I said, Alcuin of York was interesting. He's not necessarily brilliant. So there we have a brief summary of Alcuin's contributions to maths. He did not push the discipline forward, but he did kickstart recreational maths book genre. He also contributed to the cultural richness of maths, one wolf, goat, and cabbage at a time. I will finish off today then by giving you a brief glimpse of the overarching story and the road ahead. This has been the final episode in my first series on the history of the mathematicians. My original aims were to discuss every mathematician whose name we know starting with aims and progressing forwards without any gaps. I quickly abandoned this strategy as I realised that the narrative would make less sense bouncing between different cultural spheres where there was little passing of knowledge between. So instead, I divided the world into three broad traditions at first: the Hellenistic tradition, the Indian tradition, and the Chinese tradition. So far, we have exclusively looked at the mathematicians following in the Greek world of the Mediterranean, with the understanding that we would return to the other stories in the future. The problem is that the Greek body of knowledge then splits in two for about 700 years. Around the 500 to 800s, we see the Roman Empire split in two, east and west, with some knowledge going towards the European and some towards the Arabian worlds. And then again, there will be little transfer of knowledge between these two far-flung theatres, until the Italian Renaissance. So for the last few episodes, we have had a rather confusing mixture of Eastern Roman and Western Roman thinkers, ending with the two Englishmen who could hardly be called Roman at all, but still get grouped in with the Romans, or indeed the Greeks. So what happens next? Well, in the Western European world, we see the unification of a vast empire under Charlemagne, and the birth of the Carolingian Renaissance. I've taken the start of this, for convenience, to be Charlemagne's coronation at Christmas Day in the year 800 CE. This will foster the start of schools and universities popping up in most European countries. The founding texts of many of these will be Aristotle and, of course, the Bible. In contrast, in the East, we will see the birth of a brand new religion. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born around 570 CE, with the religion of Islam kicking off at around 610. After a century or so of growth, Islam will be established as the dominant religion of much of Arabia, North Africa, and knocking on the door of India. One of the many good qualities of Islam is the veneration of learning and exploration. As a result, we will see the start of a golden age of learning, as I've been hinting at for a while with the Islamic Golden Age. Although we should duly note that it is not a strictly Islamic affair, and many Christian, Jewish and other minority group thinkers did contribute. The founding texts for the IGA were significantly richer than in Europe, with more texts of Aristotle, as well as Plato and many more mathematicians. This led to a slightly more scientific and slightly less religious focus compared to the European counterparts. So you might think that I could just flip a coin and either head east or west. But here we meet the problem of my original decision to follow the thread of the Greek tradition. Whilst it is reasonably fair to say that Europe only knew Roman and Greek as primary sources, an issue that goes on to create some problems with racism later down the line, the Islamic Golden Age did not spring up solely on the backs of the Greeks. You might be asking, where are the Babylonians or the Persians in all of this? Well, I've been neglecting them. In part due to the long-running animosity between the Greeks and the Persians who conquered the land from the Babylonians and inherited most of the learning. I have made some oblique hints towards Babylonian influence, but spoken very little of Persian, due in part to the frequent wars pushing the empires apart. Naturally, the Islamic empires sprung up from the land previously held by the Persians, so there is a significant Persian influence on Islamic thought. So whilst the Europeans had one thread leading in, the Islamic Golden Age has two. So who are the Persians anyway? Well, this was an empire that spread from the Mediterranean all the way into the Indus River Basin, so modern-day Pakistan, with a significant level of interaction with the Indian empires. So far, we have not taken a roll call of who is on the Indian subcontinent, but some highlights might be Mahujanupadas. So far, we have not taken a roll call of who is on the Indian subcontinent, but some highlights might be the Mahujanupadas, so 16 powerful kingdoms and republics, with Muguda becoming the most prominent, the Maya, post-Alexandrian invasion empire that managed to first unify most of India, the Kushan Empire, coming to conquer India from the north, and the Gupta Empire, which will be one of our primary focuses for mathematicians going forwards, with others as well. India is a big place and definitely not a cultural hegemon. So the Persians are going to fit better with the story of mathematics in the Indian tradition than they would in with the Greeks, and I think they would have preferred it that way as well. But this also means that the Islamic Golden Age can draw from the Greeks, the Persians, and all of the peoples of India. And that is why it will make the most narrative sense to start again from the earliest recorded history, but this time casting our net to everyone from India and Central Asia, then leading right up to the end of the classical age for India, which is conveniently not far from 800 CE. At that point, we will scoop up the Islamic Golden Age and tell the story of mathematicians from both spheres up until around 400 CE, and we will then return to Europe and finish the story from 800 to 1400 CE, and after that, well, actually I've got no idea. I haven't done enough reading. So hang on, where are the Chinese in all this? Well, again, I'm trying to divide time and space in accordance with interactions and the spread of knowledge. I have a little diagram on my desk of who passed on their learning to whom. So far, the Chinese have not yet interacted in a meaningful way with the Greeks, and never do, but there is also far less interaction with the Indians and Chinese than one might expect for countries that are neighbours. So as a result, we don't see much Chinese interaction with the rest of the story, save a bit of the Silk Road, until the European empires start going off to steal great chunks of it. So eventually, I would like to return to the start of recorded history and tell you about the mathematicians following in the Chinese tradition, but not for a long, long time. Hang on. Are you telling me that there are no mathematicians in Africa, Oceania, the Americas? Did you notice the string of interrobangs there? Absolutely not. I'm not saying that. And the mathematical traditions of these spheres are rich and interesting, although the preservation of knowledge works slightly differently with these traditions. There's just much less written material. And the mathematical historians of the 1700s to the present day have not written extensively on these topics in the same way that they have with European, Arabian, Indian, and Chinese mathematics. So I do not have the same wealth of research material to draw from. I will not say that I will never tell you about the mathematicians or the mathematics from America, Africa, and Oceania, only that I could not at all today. Perhaps you will get in touch with me on Blue Sky at mathematicians-pod to help me out with that. So there it is, the plan. Next episode, back to the start with India and Central Asia in the second series of the show. But when is next time? As you might recall, Mrs. Cornish and I are expecting our second child, so I will be giving far less of my time to research and writing. My intention is to transfer the podcast from a weekly to a maybe monthly show and try to still get it out. We will see what the future holds. As for the future, perhaps I could speak with you about fundraising. Despite my numerous jokes over the year, I have never approached anyone regarding sponsorship or paid adverts. I talk about generic construction bricks because I genuinely believe that generic construction bricks are cool. Nor do I run adverts, and I currently have no real intention to. But if you are listening to this as a member of a university or a similar institution, and you think that you would like to sponsor the show or get more episodes out and have your name associated, please do get in touch. I would absolutely love that. It takes me about 4 hours to produce an episode each week, and I would love to turn that into a job rather than a hobby. It would certainly help to justify spending the time on it. Alternatively, if you are just an ordinary person who doesn't want to sponsor me to write in a formal capacity, but you would like to support my work and show your gratitude for the last 50 episodes, I've been exploring various patronage websites, and I think Ko-fi is pretty decent. So I've set up a page at kofi.com/Benjamin Cornish. I'd be very grateful for any support there. It might allow me to produce more episodes faster. The other side of finances is, of course, my guest lineup. So far, I've had 4 excellent guests on the show who have all given me their time for free. It is commonplace in the world of academia to offer an honorarium, which has a bit like paying someone, but in a way that does not suggest that they are employed. It's sort of a politeness tip. I can't afford to pay my guests at the moment, but I'd love to go back in time and give a little thank you to my guests for their time previously, and I'd also like to be able to offer a more professional honorarium for future guests. Perhaps you could help me with that as well. Now that the sordid business of money is out the way, perhaps I could remind you one last time to get in touch with me on Blue Sky at mathematicians-pod. And for now, and for perhaps a while, thank you for listening. Goodbye. The music today is Dance Macabre Finale by Kevin MacLeod. You can find more information in the show notes.